12 years ago, my sister dropped 3 kids on my doorstep with 2 duffel bags, a stuffed rabbit missing one eye, and 4 words. Just 1 hour, promise? She didn't come back in an hour. She didn't come back in a week. She didn't come back for 11 years and 8 months. I raised those 3 children. I paid for their school shoes, sat through their fevers at 2 in the morning, cried at their graduations like the fool I apparently was. I gave up a promotion, gave up an engagement, gave up a decade of my own life because somebody had to, and she'd made it very clear that somebody wasn't going to be her. And 3 months ago, my sister walked back into my life, freshly remarried, freshly rebranded as a reformed woman on her own words, and served me with legal papers. She sued me, her own sister, the one who raised her children while she was gone. She sued me for what she called unlawful retention of parental rights and demanded I pay her back what she called the value of the years she missed. I want you to sit with that for a second because I certainly had to. If you've ever given everything to someone and been repaid with a lawsuit instead of a thank you, stay with me. Because what happened in that courtroom is the reason I'm telling this story tonight. My name is Renee Whitmore, and 12 years ago I was 29 years old, freshly promoted at a marketing firm in Portland, 6 months into an engagement to a man named Marcus, and about as far from ready for children as a person could be. My younger sister, Danielle, had never exactly been the reliable type. She'd bounced between relationships and cities since she was 19, always chasing something, a man, a scheme, a version of her life that looked better on paper than it ever did in practice. By the time she was 31, she had 3 kids with 2 different fathers, both of whom had long since vanished from the picture, and a lifestyle that revolved around whoever was currently footing the bill. I loved her. I want to be clear about that because this isn't a story about hating my sister. It's a story about loving someone enough to sacrifice everything for them, and learning, slowly and painfully, exactly what that kind of love costs when it's one-sided. The morning she showed up at my apartment, I remember every detail. It was a Saturday in March. I was still in pajamas, coffee in hand, planning to spend the day looking at venues with Marcus. Danielle's car pulled up outside, and out came my niece Ava, 6 years old, my nephew Tyler, 4, and baby Sophie, barely 18 months, balanced on Danielle's hip. I just need an hour, Danielle said, already unloading 2 duffel bags onto my porch. There's an interview, it's a huge opportunity, I can't bring the kids, and I promise 1 hour. I should have asked more questions. I should have noticed the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes, the way the duffel bags for a 1-hour interview seemed to contain a week's worth of clothes and Sophie's entire diaper supply. But I was her big sister. I'd been rescuing her in small ways her whole life. This felt like just one more small way. Go, I told her, we'll be fine. She kissed each kid on the head, told Ava to be good for Auntie Renee, and drove away. That was the last time any of us saw her for 11 years and 8 months. The first day, I wasn't worried. Danielle had flaked before, showed up hours late to things, gone quiet for a weekend when a new relationship consumed her. I fed the kids dinner, put on a movie, told myself she'd walk through the door any minute with some story about traffic or a callback interview. By the second day, I was worried. I called her phone 11 times. It went straight to voicemail every time. By the 4th day, I filed a missing person report, which the police gently informed me wasn't really applicable since an adult leaving her children with a relative isn't technically a crime, even if it felt like one. By the end of the first week, I understood with a kind of sick clarity that this wasn't a delay. This was an abandonment, dressed up in a lie small enough to get her out the door without a fight. I called Marcus that night, sitting on my bathroom floor so the kids wouldn't hear me cry. I don't know what to do, I told him. I can't just hand 3 kids over to foster care because their mother lied to me. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then we don't, he finally said. We figure it out. We didn't figure it out together for long. 6 months in, with the wedding postponed twice and our apartment now overflowing with bunk beds and a crib, Marcus sat me down and told me, as gently as a person can say something so final, that this wasn't the life he'd signed up for. He wasn't a bad man. He just wasn't ready to become an instant father of 3 for a woman who wasn't even his own sister's obligation. We ended the engagement 8 months after Danielle drove away, and I don't blame him for it, even now. I just grieved it quietly in between packing school lunches. I filed for emergency guardianship that year, then formal legal guardianship the year after, Once it became clear Danielle wasn't coming back and the children needed stability the courts could actually protect, I turned my 2-bedroom apartment into a home for 4 people. I turned down the promotion that would have required relocating, because Ava had just started kindergarten and Tyler had a speech therapist he trusted, and Sophie was, at that point, calling me Mama without either of us correcting her. I gave up the life I had built for myself and built an entirely different one, brick by exhausting brick, around 3 children who hadn't asked to be left behind any more than I had asked to be the one who caught them. I'm not going to pretend those 12 years were a montage of struggle set to sad music. They were full, genuinely full of ordinary joy. Ava's first piano recital where she froze halfway through and I mouthed the notes from the audience until she found her place again. Tyler's obsession with dinosaurs that lasted 4 straight years and turned our apartment into what he proudly called the Jurassic Zone. Sophie's laugh, which sounded exactly like Danielle's used to back before life made her hard. I worked 2 jobs for the first 3 years. I went back to school part-time to finish a degree I'd abandoned in my 20s, not for myself, but because I knew eventually the kids would need a mother who could help with homework beyond the 4th grade. I missed birthdays of my own friends, missed reunions, missed most of my 20s turning into my 30s, turning into my early 40s without a single date that lasted longer than 2 months. Because what man wants to seriously date a woman who comes as a package deal with 3 children who aren't even hers? Danielle called exactly 6 times in 12 years. Once from a number I didn't recognize, crying, asking how the kids were, promising she was getting herself together and would come back soon. Once 2 years later to ask if I could wire her $400 for a situation, which I foolishly did and never heard back about. The other 4 calls were shorter, vaguer, always ending the same way, a promise to visit that never once materialized. I stopped waiting for her apologies somewhere around year 7. I stopped explaining her absence to the kids somewhere around year 9, when Ava, 14 by then, looked at me over the dinner table and said, flatly, "You don't have to keep making excuses for her, Aunt Renee. I know what she is." That sentence broke my heart in a way I still can't fully describe. Not because it was cruel, it wasn't, it was simply true, but because I realized in that moment that these children had built their entire understanding of family, love, and reliability around me, not their mother. I had become, in every way that mattered, exactly what I never planned to be, their parent. By the time Ava turned 18, Tyler was 16, and Sophie was 13, I had spent nearly half my adult life raising a family I hadn't chosen but had never once regretted choosing to keep. And then Danielle came back. She showed up on a Tuesday evening, unannounced, driving a car that was nicer than anything she'd had before, wearing clothes that looked expensive in a careful, curated way. Standing beside her was a man in his 50s named Gordon, whom she introduced, before even hugging her own children, as my husband. I want to be honest about the first 30 seconds. Some small, foolish part of me was relieved. I thought for one brief, hopeful moment that this was the beginning of an apology, maybe even a reconciliation the kids deserved to have if they wanted it. That hope lasted exactly as long as it took Danielle to walk through my front door, look around at the home I'd built and say, "Wow, you really made yourself comfortable here, huh?" Not "thank you," not "I'm sorry," comfortable. As though the 12 years of sleepless nights, missed relationships, and every ordinary sacrifice I'd made were some kind of leisurely retreat I'd been enjoying at her expense. The kids, to their enormous credit, were polite but distant. Sophie, now 13, asked her directly, "Where have you been?" Danielle gave some vague answer about finding herself and healing from a hard chapter, gestured at Gordon like he was proof of her transformation, and changed the subject to how grown-up everyone looked. She stayed for dinner. It was, without question, one of the most surreal meals of my life. Danielle, animated and warm, telling stories about her new life in Arizona, while 3 children who called me mom in every way that mattered watched her like a stranger performing a role they didn't recognize. She left that night saying she wanted to reconnect properly, and I, still foolishly hopeful, told her that would be good for the kids, whenever they were ready. 3 weeks later, a process server showed up at my door instead. The papers named me as the defendant in a civil suit. Danielle, through a lawyer Gordon had apparently paid for, was suing me for what the filing called unlawful retention of parental custody and rights, along with a demand for financial compensation, calculated, absurdly, as the monetary value of the parenting years she claimed I had denied her the opportunity to experience. I read it twice standing in my own doorway before I fully understood what I was looking at. My sister was suing me for the privilege of having raised the children she abandoned. She wanted money. Specifically, she wanted a portion of the modest but real assets I'd built over 12 years, including equity in the small home I'd finally been able to buy once Sophie started middle school, as compensation for years she herself chose to disappear. I won't pretend I wasn't afraid. Family court is unpredictable, and I'd heard enough horror stories to know that biological parenthood carries a legal weight that even 12 years of guardianship doesn't automatically override. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Alvarez, who read through my guardianship files, my emergency filings from 12 years earlier, my school records, medical records, every scrap of documentation I'd kept without ever imagining I'd need it as evidence. "You kept everything," Patricia said, flipping through a binder I'd built almost obsessively over a decade. "I didn't know I was building a defense," I told her. "I thought I was just keeping track of my kids." She looked up at me for a long moment. "That's exactly why you're going to win this." The children, now legal or nearly legal adults, insisted on being present at the hearing. Ava, 18 and sharp as a tack, told the court plainly that she considered me her mother in every sense that mattered and had no memory of Danielle beyond the day she was dropped off. Tyler, 16, quietly stated that he didn't remember his biological mother's voice well enough to recognize it on a phone call. Sophie, 13, cried on the stand not from sadness, but from a kind of controlled anger I'd never seen in her before, and said the only mother she had ever known was sitting in the courtroom, not the woman suing her. Danielle's lawyer tried to argue that my unlawful retention had denied her the ability to reconnect. Patricia calmly presented 12 years of documentation. The 6 phone calls in over a decade. The single $400 wire transfer that was the entirety of Danielle's financial contribution to 3 children's upbringing. The emergency guardianship filings that had gone completely uncontested for 12 straight years because Danielle could not be located or reached. "Your Honor," Patricia said, closing her final statement, "my client did not deny this woman the opportunity to parent her children. This woman surrendered that opportunity herself in a driveway 12 years ago and never once attempted to reclaim it until there was a home, a college fund, and equity worth suing for." The judge did not take long. She looked directly at Danielle before delivering her ruling, and her tone was the kind of calm, cutting clarity that lands harder than any shouting ever could. "This court has reviewed 12 years of consistent, uncontested guardianship, sustained entirely by the defendant, during which the plaintiff made minimal, sporadic contact and provided negligible financial or emotional support. The plaintiff's absence was not the result of external circumstance or hardship beyond her control. It was, by her own admission in this filing, a period she has characterized as finding herself." Meanwhile, 3 children were fed, housed, educated, and raised to adulthood by the very person she now seeks financial compensation from. The judge dismissed the custody claim entirely, citing the children's clearly established, long-term, stable home with me and, for the 2 who were legal adults, their own explicit testimony. She dismissed the financial claim as well, calling it, in words I will remember for the rest of my life, an attempt to monetize a decade of absence at the expense of the sister who filled it. Danielle was ordered to cover a portion of my legal fees, given what the judge described as the suit's lack of good faith basis. I didn't feel triumphant sitting in that courtroom. I felt something quieter, a kind of exhausted vindication, 12 years in the making, finally given a name in a room where it couldn't be argued away. Danielle didn't look at me on her way out. Gordon followed a few steps behind her, his expensive confidence considerably deflated. I never learned whether the lawsuit had been entirely her idea or partly his, some attempt to access whatever modest security I'd managed to build. It didn't matter anymore. The truth had already spoken for itself in a room designed specifically to weigh truth against convenience, and truth had won. I didn't gloat. I didn't call Danielle to rub the verdict in her face. I didn't post about it, didn't tell extended family to score points in the whisper network that had already, quietly, taken my side years earlier without my ever asking them to. I simply drove home that afternoon with Ava, Tyler, and Sophie in the car, ordered pizza because none of us had the energy to cook, and watched a terrible movie on the couch with the three people who had made every single sacrifice of the last 12 years worth it, whether or not their biological mother ever understood that. Danielle sent one email a few weeks later. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was 3 sentences, defensive and brief, insisting she'd only wanted to know her kids again and that she never meant for it to go that far. I didn't respond. Some doors don't need to be slammed shut. They just need to be quietly, permanently, no longer opened. I'm 41 years old now. I never had children of my own in the traditional sense, and for a long time I grieved the version of my life that might have included that, a husband, a nursery I decorated myself, a pregnancy instead of a duffel bag on my doorstep. But I have 3 children who call me mom in every way that has ever mattered, who know, without a shadow of doubt, exactly who showed up for them and exactly who didn't. Ava is finishing her first year of college on a scholarship I cried happy tears over. Tyler still loves dinosaurs, though these days it's channeled into an obsession with paleontology that might actually become a career. Sophie, my fierce, outspoken 13-year-old, tells people without hesitation that she has one mother. And it isn't the woman who dropped her off as a baby and came back 12 years later expecting a debt to be paid. Here's what I've learned, and it's the reason I wanted to tell you this story tonight. Love isn't measured in the promises people make. It's measured in the years they actually show up for. My sister promised 1 hour and gave us 12 years of absence. I never promised anything at all. I simply stayed every single day because staying was the only thing that ever mattered to the children in front of me. You cannot sue your way into a bond you walked away from. You cannot monetize the years you chose not to live. And sometimes the greatest justice isn't the one you fight for in a courtroom. It's the quiet, undeniable truth that walks in wearing your children's faces and testifies for itself. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever given everything to someone who only came back once there was something to take, I want you to know something. You weren't foolish for staying. You were the reason there was anything worth coming back to at all. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.